To the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, commentary contributing editor and the host of the Breaking History podcast at the Free Press, where he is a columnist, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Great to be here, John. I've been walking on sunshine, to quote Christine in The Waves.
I was walking on sunshine until about an hour ago when Donald Trump came out of the White House to go to, I guess, this NATO meeting and cursed out Israel and Iran. Yesterday, he announced that he had negotiated a ceasefire in very biblical language in this True Social tweet. It was like, at the 12th hour of the 11th day of the turning of the moon, there shall be a cessation of firing, and never again will the guns be loud. And anyway, so he very
and
proudly
the Lord said to Moses, "Thank you for your attention to this matter."
What should be called the 12-day war.
Is in the
what should be called the 12-day war.
That is the 12-day war, right. Okay, so anyway, he was like, okay, he got a ceasefire. And then as the hour of the ceasefire was approaching, the Iranians launch the last, one thought would be the last barrage of missiles they could get in before the deadline, blew up a building in Beersheba, and then 3 hours, and continued firing intermittently for 3 hours after the ceasefire deadline. So the Israelis said, we have to respond. They violated the ceasefire that we agreed to, and planes took off to do just that. Whereupon Trump, everybody know this by the time you're hearing me say this, but Trump came out of the White House and was very peeved. And he said, these two guys have been
fighting
this war for so long. For so long?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Israel's been fighting for 20 months, and I do think that the October 7th war is a war with Iran, but nonetheless, that they don't know what the F they're doing, said Donald Trump, and tweeted out that he had told Bibi Netanyahu to turn the planes around, and that he was angry with him, and then apparently Bibi turned the planes around, and with the idea, and I don't know if this has now been verified that it's happened or not, that they would take one shot, that they would retaliate with one shot.
They hit a radar system or whatever as the token shot.
Okay, so
honestly,
your guess is as good as mine. What the hell is going
on?
John,
I don't care. I don't care. I'm not
here.
That's. I feel like this kind of thing is priced in with Trump, and it's probably the Iranians' fault. I mean, we don't really know, but my sense is that obviously the Iranians were trying to get their last licks in. They probably did violate the ceasefire. Israel was within its rights, and if we want to just focus narrowly on this one thing, but I can't keep my eye off the bigger picture here, which is this was a geopolitical, just enormous, miraculous change for the entire region and for the world. And Iran was humiliated. This was a huge loss. And my hope is that this will give the Iranian people, and I think that the West should support the Iranian people, the opportunity to finally take their country back. The regime is humiliated and weakened. The job's not necessarily over, but at this point, I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. Let's be real, okay?
I just want to state for the record, it's not that I don't agree with you, and Trump said, and I think he may have intelligence at this to this effect, that the Iranian control command and communications are so screwed up that he doesn't even know if they intended the launch after the ceasefire. Maybe people didn't get the message not to, and which is why I guess he pulled Bibi. Why he had to curse everybody out, I don't know. You're saying it's priced in.
Trump. Just price it in, you caught him at the moment probably when he was getting it, the info.
The ceasefire was structured so that it didn't start at the same time for everybody involved. And that was a big part of the confusion. Trump even said that, Israel had, depending on how you calculate it, Israel had 6 or 12 hours after Iran's ceasefire started, and Trump tweeted something that's posted this morning that, well, they had their window then to respond. And, when I say you can respond, you don't drop all the biggest bombs in the first minute of that window. So it was like he was saying that they were still within their rights to hit Iran, even outside of the ceasefire. The ceasefire hadn't begun for
But
Israel
he did.
yet.
But he said,
But it
"Don't."
was like, don't make a big spectacle of it.
Okay,
So it's very hard
fair
to
enough.
tease out what
Right.
the specific things that are upsetting him. But I think he's just like, okay, we did it. It's done. Everybody move on.
Okay, I mean, first of all, Eli, as you know, I agree with you that this was a world historical moment. I think we have a new world in which non-proliferation has teeth for the first time certainly since the fall of the Berlin Wall. A world in which, if the world goes somewhat multipolar,
First, hold on,
obviously,
John. First time since 2003. Remember, Gaddafi gives up his weapons of mass destruction, and the Iranians pause their weapons program after the United States invades Iraq. So I would say
enough.
2003.
Okay, but the North Koreans had already gone nuclear by then.
2003. I don't think they had gone nuclear yet. I think it was a little after.
Yes, they had. 2002, the Bush administration announced that North Korea had gone nuclear.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Christopher Hill came out and said that.
Right.
that. So anyway, it doesn't. These are technical details. Yeah. This is a remarkable moment, and it is. And what matters is that, and that we, the United States, struck. So, Eli, you're saying that it doesn't really mean that much that Trump had this. We should price it in that he had this explosion of temper, in which he drew a moral equivalence between Israel and Iran and said that neither of them knows what the F they're doing. Abe, do you think that that's giving Trump too much of a pass, or does Trump deserve the pass?
It's not even. I mean, I'm with Eli on this. It's not even a pass, really. It's just that Israel and the U.S. have coordinated so extraordinarily throughout this that even when the ceasefire was announced, I was not inclined to second guess it, and I'm not inclined to second guess the violation of the ceasefire or Trump's lashing out at both sides. I don't even know anymore what is a feint, what is genuine. But I am deeply secure in this larger sense that the U.S. and Israel have worked together to do something extraordinary, and that will not be lost in any way to anyone over a throwaway Trump tantrum. That's my inclination.
Seth, what's your take?
By the way, I just want to add,
I
see people online who were against all this. They're making a mountain out of this. They think that Trump is mad now that Israel has led us into this war that we won't be able to get out of, and all that stuff. I think it's all a bunch of garbage. Obviously, it's garbage because, as you say, Bibi has done what Trump wanted.
Yeah, no, that's what I think too. I think the watching the people who predicted World War III is actually what tells you, what the takeaway from this war is. That people who are, instead of saying, well, I thought the whole thing would blow up, and in fact it didn't blow up. People are saying well, Iran really proved that they can blow up buildings in Beersheba, and therefore, Israel doesn't want to mess with them, and it's really there's this, and they make this whole
and then they make the opposite
argument.
case. They make the opposite case. Iran's so reasonable. They're so peace-seeking that they wouldn't respond to this unprovoked attack from Israel.
Iran's restraint.
At a certain point, it just becomes self-discrediting. I mean, I don't think that there needs to be a series of commentary columns and Wall Street Journal op-eds saying how wrong they are. I think all you need to do is press record, play it back, say, what do you think, American people? Does this sound normal to you? I mean, Tucker Carlson's first response is, I want to thank Qatar. Come on. I mean, it's a joke at this point.
Well, and then the interesting thing was that while this was going on...
If you look at Tucker's Twitter feed, he posts something and then it says paid sponsorships for the Tucker Carlson show. moink, this, whatever,
Yeah.
like various things.
Blue
And it should
gorilla
say, and
or
it should
whatever
say
the food
it
thing
should
was.
say the
Tucker
Qatari
Carlson,
government.
7-part document.
But
Wait,
It's Qatar. A check comes flying into Maine, into rural Maine, pallet of cash.
Well,
By
that's
the way,
where,
literally
this,
that,
hold on,
where do you
John.
think they
dropped on
were
top-
when
In all-
Orion was hitting the
in all seriousness,
airport
John,
in Qatar?
Yeah.
They had to go
In all
somewhere, so
seriousness,
they
you're
went to
getting
Maine.
at something very
Yeah.
important, because the line from Tucker was not even implicit; it was an explicit. These Jews, these neocons, these hawks are undermining American interests. They won't fight in these wars. They're sending our boys off to die, as a typical kind of dual loyalty canard that, we hear every generation, from Lindbergh, and then we heard it in the early 2000s from the left. And it's a whole thing about, you're not real Americans. Who's not a real American? I mean, I'm just curious. Like, Iran's got all this American blood on its hands, and the line from so many of that crowd is, "Oh my God, Iran they're just seeking peace," and like, "Oh, the only thing I have to say about this remarkable set of events, the 12-day war that ends like with pretty much a victory for America and Israel, is thank you, Qatar." I mean, give me a break. Who's the real American at this point? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Let's have that conversation.
And the other
Let's
thing
have
is
that
that
conversation. Who's really interested in America's interests? Let's have that conversation.
But who's the other person that he thanked? That's the other thing, Eli. Who's the other person? Trump. The people who warned against this are desperately singing Trump's praises now as a peacemaker. So they see the way this, if you want to see who has their finger on the pulse, look at the guys who came crawling back.
Totally.
And understand that Trump looks good because of
we're
all this stuff
thanking
that
Trump
happened.
too.
And they need better get back on his.
I mean,
right. But we're thanking Trump for what actually happened. I'm saying they broke with Trump and said and now are coming crawling back. And I think that's all you really need to know about how this went.
But as I say, also, you just figure, just follow the money, or implicitly follow the money, because you're talking about commerce here. You're talking about, this is a business that's being run. These influencers have businesses. Their podcasts are businesses. Their companies are businesses. And some of this may be entirely internal support, internal money, internal advertising, but I don't buy that.
Listen, I think it's a little bit of both.
I don't
right?
know.
Some of it is there's an audience, sadly, in America, of people who want to hear Coughlin-esque, Lindbergh-esque garbage about why there is a fifth column undermining American national interests, etc. And they're hungry for it, and they'll find obscure amateur historians, and they'll find Tucker Carlson, and they'll find Candace Owens, and that's serving an audience. And it's a big country. There are people who are really enthusiastic about that, and that's a real thing. And then there is a foreign info op that's kind of seeking to supercharge it. And so it's not one or the other, it's both. And I, by the way, want to say that there was a story going around about Tucker Carlson, to be fair, that was unfair about him, which said that, somebody paid a PR firm to set up an interview with Tucker Carlson. That's not Tucker Carlson getting Qatari money. That's Qatar paying a lot of money to a PR firm to get an interview with their prime minister. Fine. And people kind of misread the FARA forms on that. But, Tucker's clearly playing to that audience of Americans who think that Commentary Magazine, because it is affiliated with Jewish Americans and so-called neoconservatives, are somehow disloyal Americans. And to which I want to say, yeah, let's have that conversation, Tucker. You've been basically defending and apologizing for one of the worst enemies for the United States. We've been telling the truth about that enemy of the United States. So, in the words of the great James Brown, don't tell a lie about me, or I'll tell a truth on you. So that's how I feel about it. Great, let's have that conversation. Who loves this country? We love this country, John.
Well said. So the question that is raised now is, will this ceasefire hold? And obviously, the situation that Israel finds itself in with Trump is that Israel now has to wait and watch as the Iranians do act or don't act. The ceasefire is entirely in the Iranians' hands, and I think since Bibi did what he had to do, which is he had to sort of acquiesce to Trump's request, if we want to call it a request, not to strike back hard. He has he has played ball with Trump as he will, and maybe now this is an indication if Iran acts, sends more missiles at Israel, that Trump's apologia today, which is I don't even know if they meant to fire it off, will have been proved. He will on the second turning, that will be an offense to him from the Iranians, unambiguously. Right? I mean, so he's saying, I don't even know if they meant to do it, so Israel should come back, that no one knows what the F they're doing. If they do it again tonight or tomorrow or something like that, Israel still has the interceptors. Obviously, a couple of the missiles got through this attack on this building in Beersheba. Not a mass casualty event exactly, but I don't know, 7 or 8 are dead, 20 are injured. They haven't done the full battle assessment yet to see, or the injury assessment yet, but it's very bad. Just earning a response. So they did whatever they did here. If more happens now, I don't know why Trump would want Israel not to respond.
Well, he likes to be able to say that things are clean and done, but I think the other
they are
perspective,
clean and done, then he says they're clean and done.
Right.
But if they're not, they will know. Like that's.
But I think the other perspective from the American perspective, the other thing is that there's an understanding that Israel has now a huge advantage also. And so there's this, like, remember when Trump tends to go to the stronger party in a conflict and have them, and put pressure on them to go whichever way he wants the conflict to go, because he knows that they can, to a large degree, control what happens next. And I think that Israel proved itself as the stronger in this conflict with Iran, not just with Iran's proxies, but with Iran itself. And I think that Trump is reverting to his classic, okay, Israel is the one that controls the tides in the Middle East right now. So if I want something to go a certain way, I'm going to ask Israel to help me.
Or maybe he could just say, he could come out and do the next tweet saying, Iran, you don't have the cards. You don't have the cards.
Speaking of which, Trump is due to meet Zelensky later today. And so God knows what's going to happen there in that conversation. I don't really have anything to say about that. I just saw that he was meeting Zelensky today. Let's go back to the 30,000 foot perspective. What I said about the new regime, what I think should probably be called the Trump doctrine after many years of efforts to find a Trump doctrine. And as Abe says, he resists any such thing. The implicit effect of the strike on Iran is to say that the United States has demonstrated in the person of Trump and with the weaponry that it has developed, that it has the means, the motive, the opportunity, and the precedent now of eliminating nuclear programs before they achieve breakout. And that this then represents this year marks the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, effectively beginning with 9/11, with the direct attack on the United States by a stateless terrorist group supported by a rogue nation, and this quarter century ends. Let's say, maybe not ends because there's another 6 months to go in this year, but with a rogue nation developing the world's worst weapon, humiliated, and its ability to project power completely eviscerated. That's an interesting progression because what were we worried about in the wake of 9/11? what was on everybody's mind? That this was an opening salvo, and that the thing to watch for was the suitcase nuke. If somebody could get a nuclear weapon and bring it to Times Square, or a dirty bomb, not even a nuke, not even a fully armed nuke, but like a radiation device, and let it loose in Times Square on New Year's Eve or somewhere where there were, where there were a lot of Americans gathered, Super Bowl, whatever, and then you have sort of like the world goes dark. The
Right. And
world,
people who were young then won't remember just how powerful that fear was. It dominated pop culture. We had Jack Bauer, for 8 seasons in 24. That was the plot of the first season, but that was the sort of, we had shows and movies about the suitcase dirty bomb. It had sort of taken over pop culture's brain for a long time. It really was the way America.
Right. And the idea that unconventional weaponry was now the tool of the unconventional fighting force was not just because of the hijacking of the planes and flying them into buildings. It was also that several weeks after that the anthrax envelopes started showing up at the New York Post, 10 feet from where I was sitting, at NBC News, at the National Enquirer. 3 people died. A bunch of people got sick. No one has ever fully made sense out of what happened there. But whether or not what happened there happened, it was in fact like a psychotic, domestic, weird, terrorist attack by a lunatic. The anthrax coming hard upon 9/11. I wouldn't even call it a national panic, because panic suggests that the response was unreasonable. There was a kind of national terror. The terrorism worked. The country was terrorized. What was interesting was that what you would have now, which is you'd have a bunch of people saying, well, that all happened in New York. I don't care. It's all New York. They all suck and they have a bad school system and they're terrible. That was not the case a quarter century ago, and everybody felt as though this was an attack on everybody else, and that who knows what could happen. Someone could go to the Mall of America, in the Twin Cities and do a mass casualty event or something like that. Everybody felt implicated. Everybody was frightened. And that's where this doctrine that Dick Cheney enunciated, which was the 1% doctrine, which was if there's a 1% chance that a nuclear weapon can be detonated inside the United States by a terrorist group, we have to act to eliminate that threat, because even if 99% chance it doesn't happen, the 1% chance would be so catastrophic.
We have to act as if it were a certainty.
Well, hold on.
Exactly.
But this gets to another Bush doctrine, which wasn't really a doctrine because he didn't follow through on it. But remember, his whole thing was if you house a terrorist, feed a terrorist, arm a terrorist, and if you're a regime that does that, then you're a terrorist. And that was part of the explanation for Afghanistan and Iraq, but he didn't follow through.
It was the whole explanation for Afghanistan. That's why we did, as they say, regime change. Why we went into Afghanistan to destroy the Taliban, to try to find Bin Laden and and Al Qaeda, which they escaped through the caves of Tora Bora. But our idea was that the people who harbored Bin Laden were Bin Laden.
The problem is that they were to be
treated as though they were
states like Syria and Iran got off the hook. Now, what's interesting? There's a couple interesting things here. First of all, the connection between rogue regimes and terrorism predates 9/11. It goes back to the Cold War, and it goes back to specifically people like Richard Pipes and others pointed out that the Soviets, and they were, by the way, supporting all of these left-wing terrorist groups all over the world, including some of the kind of forerunners to, Arab terrorism. So, the PLO had a very close relationship with, Romanian intelligence, and Carlos the Jackal had a very close relationship at the end of the day with the KGB, and that this was part of the Soviet sort of state policy to work through such proxies, and Iran has in many ways mimicked it. Now, why is that important in 2025? Because what our adversaries are now saying, and one of their lines, which is incredible that this is being forwarded at this point, is that Iran hasn't attacked anybody, and they're trying to de-link Iran's support for
Our ideological
our yes
adversaries
inside the United
inside the
States.
United States, not
No,
our
our
foreign
ideological
adversaries. Yeah,
adversaries inside the
right.
United
Okay.
States are trying to
Yeah,
say
right.
that there
Yeah,
was
okay.
zero provocation for Israel, and that in fact they're not acknowledging the links between Iran and how it fights its wars, which is through these proxies and the network that Qasem Soleimani had built up. And obviously Trump totally understands that, and anyone who knows anything about these things totally understand that, and it was a dishonest argument. And by the way, I'm not so sure that we have to have the argument again. I think that argument is over at this point. But it's interesting that was one of the lines that they kind of put out there, because this was, again, during the Cold War, especially kind of post 75. There was one side, that used to be the rollbackers, who then kind of said the Soviets are using the strategy of proxy terror groups, and then all the detentists and everybody else was saying no, 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 there's no evidence of that. And then we saw it again after 9/11. That became the thing, and that was a part of what was supposed to be the Bush doctrine. And then we're sort of seeing it now in the Iran case. So that is a link that I think kind of closes that 25-year chapter that you were talking about.
That's a very interesting analysis, because the world of the deniers of the threats to the United States posed by these revolutionary actors. In the case of the Soviet Union, of course, they were communist revolutionaries believing in the overthrow of the capitalist order,
although the
and
Soviets
the
were happy to
democratic
work with
countries.
like
Okay.
slightly kind of proto-Islamist groups too. They like terrorism.
Right, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
right. So you had that, and then you have the fight against terrorist groups, rogue nations like Iran, and throughout from the 60s to the present day, you have had this alternate narrative, which is like the United States' existence is a provocation to all of these countries and all these places. Maybe it's because we're too good. Maybe it's because we're meddling and we're bungling, and we go around places and we stick our hands in things that we shouldn't and get people mad at us. But we bring a lot of this on ourselves, and a lot of this is defensive. The Soviets are defending themselves by creating an alternate world structure. And all of that, and they're using the means that they have to hand. That's why détente is a good idea, and simultaneously, efforts made to poo-poo the threat. So I was thinking, because I mentioned anthrax, and you're talking about some of this, about the multi-year effort to prove that the Soviets had not used chemical weapons in Afghanistan, what was called Yellow Rain. And they clearly had, or they had played games with it. And the world of scientific experts that we all came to know and love during COVID came down like a ton of bricks on the arguments being made by the intelligence community and others that the Soviets were toying with the use of chemical weapons. Why? Because if you have to acknowledge that the Soviets want to use chemical weapons, they're not only in violation of a treaty signed in the 1920s, but that's just a demonstration that they are an actor not only in bad faith, but a genuinely dangerous, willing to use weapons of mass destruction, and therefore you have to deal with them as that. And these people wanted to think that the Soviets were an ordinary nation that you could do business with, that they had interests similar to ours in their own way, and that we should be able to negotiate with them and deal with them and be happy with them, or have cultural exchanges with them, move forward here. And we have this two-faced argument, one of which is maybe they weren't going nuclear, or if they were, they could, and why couldn't they, and they shouldn't be, but they were and they're not. Or now we have they were going nuclear, and now nobody knows where the nobody knows where the uranium is, and so we've
can we
now
just
done
stop
this, and
for
now
on the
there's
nobody
gonna
knows
be
where the uranium is?
Okay. Yeah.
Given the string of successes of the Mossad and the fact that obviously Iran is wired and they had control of the skies and they have all this incredible technology, it's possible they don't know where the uranium is, but I am of the view that they probably have a plan for that. At a certain point, I mean, you just look at the string of brilliant successes of the Israelis, especially in the intelligence realm, and the fact that they had so many eyes on Fordo. The idea that the Iranians were able to ferret out all this material and nobody could do anything about it strikes me as, what's the opposite of wishful thinking? Like, what?
My favorite tweet on this was Dave Reboy said something very funny on Twitter, which was that there's a really high probability that the Iranians gave undercover Mossadniks the uranium to hide.
Who's driving the
Right.
truck?
Literally
Exactly.
handed
driving the
the
trucks, right.
Israelis.
Yeah, no.
Put this
Shlomo
somewhere.
I need to
Rafsanjani knows
mention
exactly
this.
where to put it. Exactly.
Yeah. Trump, in the same press availability as he was heading to the helicopter at like 7:00 this morning, that where he lashed out at Israel and Iran, also lashed out at CNN and MSNBC for poo-pooing the idea that the strikes on the nuclear program had been effective. And here's what he said. I see CNN all night long. They're trying to say, well, maybe it wasn't really as demolished as we thought. I think CNN ought to apologize to the pilots of the B-2s. I think MSNBC ought to apologize. Cable networks are real losers. You're gutless losers. It's amazing how much damage has been done to this excuse me, that's not him, that's somebody else. Okay, so he's angry. Yeah. And it was true. If you watch the last 48 hours, you would think that this strike, well, let's not get out over our skis. We dropped 6 bombs of a size in conventional weaponry that have never been seen before on this earth, very specifically on perfectly targeted sites. And as Eli said, and you think that they didn't think about where the uranium was or was going to be. And I look at Bibi on Monday after the strikes and everything, looking like the cat who ate the canary, and I'm thinking he's not worried about where it is. He was like, first he said, we know where it is, and then he said, I have some idea where it is, or something like that. The line that they are handing out, or the sort of the spin, is that Fordo has been buried so deep, so inaccessible, so that it's there and it's buried and no one will ever get it out. It's like the genie in Aladdin, the lamp that's there for 10,000 years until somebody can find it, right? In the Cave of Wonders or whatever.
Yeah, it's like when you hide your keys where your kids won't find them, and then you end up hiding them from yourself.
Exactly. Anyway, but I don't believe, I am skeptical, as they didn't move on this without a very specific. First of all, they know everything about this program. They stole. I'm sorry. They stole all the paper.
Yeah.
Right. In 2018. Not that means that they know where it is in 2025, but they knew what apartment in an apartment complex, the head of the IRGC was living in, and shot a missile right into the wall of the building to kill him and nobody else in the building. They don't know where the fissile material is. Give me a break. That doesn't make any sense. The one thing that they would know as part of their intelligence mission, maybe the one most important thing that they would know is, where is it now? How do we know that they haven't milled it to 80%? You know how they know that they hadn't broken out yet? 2 things, one of which the Iranians hadn't announced that they hadn't milled it to 80%. And somebody in the milling room was their agent. So if they know that, and they know that they're close and all of that, that's because they had intelligence.
I think it's even better than that. I think it's like in The Departed when Matt Damon's character realizes that like Whitey Bulger has another guy on the payroll, and the guy's like, "You think you're the only one working for Whitey," or something like that, Frank Costello or whatever his name is. It's
Yeah.
just like, I think it's like that. I think it's
Yeah.
like one guy was in the Fordo or uranium thing, another guy was in the Isfahan facility, and they didn't know they were working for the Israelis, but then they kind of find, that it's like they
Yeah.
had networks upon networks. I just.
Three ICE agents tackled an undercover
Right,
ICE agent the other day. I think that's what
Yeah, it's
we're
like-
describing.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I'm with you on this one way or another, and Trump being angry at the cable networks. It is this bizarre effort to first of all, I understand that people think, he exaggerates. He says it's overwhelming success, maybe not. People say things like that about military before there's a full damage assessment or battle assessment or whatever. But this the pettiness and the churlishness with which, again, the experts who aren't even experts, because what do they know?
All the expert
What do they know about
assessments
the
on this, about why it was unfeasible, how you can't bomb away an idea, and all these things. I'm just like, when are you going to readjust your analysis based on what we've seen the Israelis accomplish that you said was impossible? I mean, remember
Well, by the way, this is the readjustment. They've gone from the broad conceptual.
like, remember, we don't even know if the bunker
techniques
buster will work on Fordo. Remember that one? We don't even know if it'll work.
Right. So
Never been tried before.
So now they have to. They have to dwell on
Iran's
the
air
petty. Now
defense
they have
system
to
is
say,
one of the best in the world. They've got the S-500s.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, people. I'm just being a realist here. Oh, okay. Okay. Sure. It's just the same people who said, remember the same people who said you can't shoot a bullet with a bullet out of the sky. We heard it for 25 years. This missile defense thing that Reagan's talking about, it's never going to happen. It's science fiction. It's Star Wars. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to say about this
Israel has
ideological...
shot down 10,000 missiles in the last 15 years. 10,000 projectiles at Israel from Gaza, from Lebanon and from Iran now, and Yemen have been shot down, hitting bullet in the sky, as you say. So yes, that was a very big thing. I'm sorry, Seth.
I just want, on that whole thing, the ideological war and the people twisting themselves in pretzels. During the Cold War, for much of it, the USSR was a closed society, and there weren't cell phones with cameras and all that stuff around. And we were trying to, the information war was like sneaking in copies of Dr. Zhivago. Right? I mean, there was a plausibility to people who said...
planning stories in the Indian media
when a dissident...
CIA inventing AIDS. That was the other thing that the Soviets did to us.
Right. And like when a Soviet dissident left, got out, and there was a plausibility to the people who said, well, I don't know if I believe you, I haven't seen that or whatever. What we're seeing now is an especially shameful display, because we all know from the very beginning that Iran is evil. We all know what Hamas did. They wore GoPro cameras on October 7th. We all know that Hezbollah's big, debut was murdering 241 U.S. Marines at the barracks in Beirut. We all know all of this stuff. We all know what they say and what they do. And still the twisting themselves into pretzels. There is this... Like, once upon a time, there was an ideological war that had enough of the fog of war that you weren't really 100% sure if anybody was telling the truth. That ended a very long time ago. And the people who are still pushing that sort of line, it's muscle memory. It's an instinctive, anti-American, anti-Western, anti-civilizational instinct that they have, that now has become a sort of a tick, something they don't. It's like blinking or swallowing. And that's happening in an era where we all see everything that's going on. The Israeli planes will have a camera on them. The B-2 bombers will show you the videotape of the bombs that going through the roof of Fordo. And so there's something especially risible about all this stuff. And it's harder to be patient
But
with
there's
it.
there's another element now, which is that ever since 9/11, every event, every conflict has its truthers. And the truthers have made inroads, or at least sort of applied some weird pressure on the mainstream to be skeptical. They showed the mainstream as a sort of another way to be able to hate your own side.
Well, Eli, Eli, I want to praise you for a second. So Eli did a brilliant podcast earlier this year about the JFK conspiracy theorists and the history of JFK conspiracy theories. This is the moment that started. Arguably, it started a little earlier with people questioning whether or not Franklin Roosevelt knew that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked and allowed it to happen so that we could get into the war. Something that was conclusively, theoretically disproven. First of all, there's no paper that says anything like that. And second, Roberta Wallstetter wrote a great book on this subject, showing how there was no way to connect the dot pattern of information and see this coming. But JFK assassination was the moment at which come on, this guy shoots him from a window, and then this gangster running a strip club kills him as he's being brought in to be arraigned. And then Earl, the Warren Commission says he acted alone. Come on, what the hell is going on? And from there, everything goes haywire, right? It's that. Then it's the moon landing was faked.
Yeah.
There are still people who believe the moon landing was faked, and that
there are more now who believe it than there were.
Right. Well, there are more people.
But this is why this is a point I want to make.
Yeah.
The difference, I agree, the sort of general state of paranoia and distrust began with those things. But 9/11 coincided perfectly with the communications technology to allow for communities to arise out of people who believe in these things. And that was like the beginning of the all discourse had at least a drop of poison in it.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've an even earlier moment to remind people of, which is TWA Flight 800.
Oh, yes, Pierre Salinger,
which took off. Yes, so took off from Kennedy Airport. Was 10 minutes in the air. It was near Center Moriches on the south shore of Long Island, and blew up in the air. And people with very early, not cell phones, because cell phones didn't have cameras then, but who had like portable cameras that could take film, 2 or 3 images suggested that there was a streak of light nearby just before the plane blew up, and that meant that somebody had fired a missile at the plane. And everybody said, every in the world said this hadn't happened. That if it had happened, there was more film. There would be, you'd actually see, somebody would have been actually filming it when it happened, and that's not the case. There was no film of any, And yes, Pierre Salinger, who had been JFK's press secretary and a foreign correspondent, lead chief foreign correspondent for ABC News for 30 years or something like that, was absolutely convinced, right, that somebody shot this down and that there was a conspiracy to cover it up. And he believed the conspiracy came not from this group that we barely knew of, Al Qaeda or something like that, but from inside the United States. And the question was, why would somebody inside the United States take a shoulder-fired missile and shoot at a plane and blow it up? Who was on that plane? Who was with the passenger manifest? Why did it happen? What was being hidden? Was there some document on the plane that needed to be blown up? And all of that. That bubbled. Like, mainstream press was still very powerful, made fun of it. Salinger's reputation was ruined. in many ways, but that was kind of like a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal for what happened after 9/11, when people started with the steel can't melt steel, right? According to who? You know, what do you mean? What do you mean it can't? You know, that was you know, and so all of that
Fire can't melt steel or something.
firemen, yeah, whatever. I don't know.
Whatever, who knows? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever. I can't remember. Doesn't.
Well, but the flip side of that is that
it's like we all watched
Right.
the planes smash into the World Trade Center, and then people are like, it didn't really smash into the World Trade Center. I mean, that was the weird part, was at least the circumstantial evidence patterns in the JFK case, let's say, or even in Flight 800. You understood why people needed to be convinced out of their skepticism. A plane doesn't blow up out of nowhere, and Jack Ruby's killing of Lee Harvey Oswald, that was pretty weird. Like, isn't that what you would do to silence somebody who was being taken into, federal custody?
And by the way, that happens at a time
you have to explain
when
that away.
The government really did do things that it didn't tell us about. And that comes out 10 years later in the Church Committee,
Right.
or 13 years later, because it was 12 years later. But the point is
Right.
that it's like there was a little bit of that where, like, yes, you should be skeptical of some of the official things from the government, or things that people dismissed at first, but were true. The CIA really did conduct LSD experiments on prisoners and mental patients, and covered it up, and that was bad, and we shouldn't have done it, and that really happened. And so sometimes, not to say that you should believe conspiracy theories, but it's not always a clean cut. That's
Well, it comes back to your point, Eli,
to
a point.
Exactly.
Right? The Eli Lake doctrine, to a point.
Right. And of course, we just lived through COVID.
Yeah.
And it's not, I think that we saw, there is no question, I believe now, that we can say that there was a conspiracy in March of 2020 to bury evidence of the involvement of the scientists around the EcoHealth Alliance and the funding of the EcoHealth Alliance, to bury evidence of their involvement in gain of function research and funding at the Wuhan labs. We know that. We know it happened. It happened right in front of our eyes, and it took people that we might have thought were crazy 2 years earlier, some of them, although not all of them, to surface this information showing these people in an email chain saying we need to suppress this and come out with statements and form a phalanx to protect ourselves.
But,
I mean, they never quite said it that plainly, but so that's just an example that sometimes there are conspiracies, and there are. It's not that there aren't.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 reasons for some optimism on this. The first one is that, to bring another one where I think there was perfectly legitimate grounds for skepticism, was the so-called, was the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein. Okay. I certainly didn't believe the initial story either. But now, somebody who when he was a radio host, Dan Bongino, is now the deputy director of the FBI, and Kash Patel's the director of the FBI. And they had to say a few months ago, we've looked at the documents, that it was a suicide. Well, I don't know what to tell you. There's no evidence that this was some sort of inside job.
Yeah, Bill Barr said
Bill Barr said it, it's different, because Bill Barr is from the kind of knowledge class and the insider class and so forth. When Dan Bongino, who, I don't know how many shows he devoted to the Epstein files and like, what are they hiding? He has to say, hey, listen, I'm the deputy director of the FBI. I see everything. And I'm telling you, there's nothing there. And,
Okay, that's my favorite part, though. So now he's said this, and now this is proof, analogical proof to a bunch of people who hate Trump, that this proves that Trump is in the Epstein files.
But I'm saying there's a lot of people.
They're not going to release the Epstein files, and that's why they're saying that it was a suicide.
But there's a lot more people who were pro-Trump who thought that there was an Epstein conspiracy, who would trust Bongino over everybody, over Barr certainly, and everybody else, who now are like, some
Right.
some of them going to say, of
Right.
course, they got to him too. Yeah, that
Yeah.
happens. If once you believe one
Right.
conspiracy
Right.
theory, it's like a gateway drug. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of people who are probably going to say, all right, well, if Bongino says it, if Cash says it, then maybe we drop it at this point. And that to me is good. And the second thing is this: we have an opportunity here, and I'm potentially excited about it. It goes back actually a few years. Before even Tucker left Fox, he would have on like Max Blumenthal and people who belong to kind of this conspiracy anti-American wing on his show. And you started to see the beginnings of this weird right-left alliance. I mean, we have an opportunity for a very clarifying moment. If we could trade the kind of conspiracy-minded Tucker wing for like the Fettermans and Richie Torreses, and you would have one party that would be fully reality-based, pro-American, pro-Israel, versus the party of like, kooks and haters. Oh, Baruch Hashem. Thank you very much. I would love nothing more.
Can I speak to you about kooks?
Yeah,
Can I speak
yeah,
to you about kooks and haters
yes.
before we go? Because this is a very important point. So, of course, today is the primary day.
Oh.
There was early voting for 10 days, but primary day in New York. And the way the New York Times puts it is that the last poll shows that it's too close to call between Andrew Cuomo, the candidate, despite his disgrace and personal misconduct and horrible governance during COVID, sort of the candidate of not being a crazy person and not being a socialist and not being an anti-Semite versus the crazy person, communist anti-Semite, Zoran Mamdani. And we don't know what's going on. Two things to point out about this. Number one, there was a lot of early vote. The indications are that the early vote was probably reasonably favorable to Mamdani. This is a very complicated election. But they will be reporting the polls close at 9. The first reports that are going to come out are going to be an early vote count. And it could look like Mamdani is doing really well. And people need to hold their liquor or hold their panic, because as was true in 2020, as was true in 2024, the day of vote, which should be half the vote, may go to Cuomo. And just like in 2024, Republicans were still voting on day of, and Democrats had taken advantage of early voting much more than Republicans had. And so the early, that you saw these numbers as the Republicans, like, for example, in North Carolina, like marched ahead, like slowly marched ahead after early votes were counted in various places. But I wanted to point out, it's as bad as you think. And it's not just about Mamdani's communism and anti-Semitism, which is, I'm not saying it's not the worst part of him. He has a campaign political director, who's 28 years old. His name is Julian Gerson. Julian Gerson has a blog. And I went and looked up the blog today. And at the end of 2024, he had a long blog post about Luigi Mangione, the assassin of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And I'm going to read you a paragraph that he wrote about Mangione. Mangione, while his remarkable good looks hardly hurt, anyone who thinks his acclaim is primarily rooted in aesthetics is missing the point, probably on purpose. He is adored not only because he dared to target a leader of one of the most vile, self-enriching industries darkening our society today, but because he dared to defy the stasis of nihilistic rejection. The question is not whether he was right or wrong, it's how many others he has shaken loose. This is a call for mass murder of healthcare executives, healthcare personnel. This guy is the campaign political director for this person who is either, is tied in this race today. This guy, if he wins and then wins the mayoralty, controls the New York City Police Department and how it enforces things and where it stands on things. And his political director is a supporter of a person that we know without a shadow of a doubt shot a guy in the back on 53rd Street at 6:45 in the morning while he was bringing a cup of coffee back to his hotel room.
Why is that, Jay? Why is it that
Political
you get
director.
to bring that up? Where's Andrew Cuomo's campaign? Why isn't he prosecuting this particular case? Why is it that there's the alternative to the commie?
He is.
Why is the
To be
alternative
fair,
to the commie this flawed, failed governor who got nursing homes sick with COVID? I mean, come on.
First of all, there is an immense amount of anti-Mamdani literature and advertising and stuff going around New York. You wouldn't have seen it because it's all here. Trust me, my mailbox has 10 things a day about how terrible Mamdani is, and the advertising on TV during the newscasts is unbelievable. It's unbelievable how much it is. Cuomo's a terrible candidate. He is a flawed, disgraced, but he had a lot of money, and nobody else ran in his lane. Nobody else ran as the sane person in the race. Everybody ran to the left. It classic because it's a ranked choice voting system. Anyway, the fact that I'm sitting here and a lot of people I know are sitting around desperately hoping for a certain result here involving Cuomo is astounding to me. I loathe Cuomo. I've loathed Cuomo for 30 years. I loathed him when he was at HUD. I loathed him when he once called me on the phone and threatened me because I wrote something about housing policy that he didn't like. And he said, "You're going to get yours. Believe you me," said to me on the phone. He's not, I don't like him. I loathe him. I loathe the way he was, but he has some skills. He rebuilt LaGuardia Airport. He rebuilt the Tappan Zee Bridge. He made sure the Second Avenue subway, at least some part of it, was completed.
And he's obviously better than an anti-Semitic communist. Yes, of course. Without a doubt. I want Cuomo to win.
Okay,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. So I don't endorse candidates, and we don't endorse candidates on this podcast, but that's fine. But that's the circumstance that we find ourselves in, and I just think the meaning of the Mamdani victory, getting to your point about whether or not there's going to be a kind of reshuffling of the political, ideological, and partisan decks in the United States based on what's happened over the last 5 to 10 years, and that's already been ongoing with the shifts of the more educated, less educated, all of that stuff may really, really accelerate now, because you will have this will mean, if Mamdani wins, that the 3 largest cities in the country are being governed by crackpot, lunatic, socialist, cop-hating morons. Mamdani's not a moron, but Brandon Johnson is a moron in Chicago. Karen Bass is certainly a moron in LA, as we've seen over the last 6 weeks. Mamdani's very smart, canny, never had a job before, so that's a pretty funny thing. But
that's how you could tell he's a real socialist, by the way, because he's so incredibly bougie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, dad of college professor, mom a movie director. But you'll be happy to know that, according to his mother, Mira Nair, who made a pretty good movie out of the novel The Namesake, starring the actor Kal Penn, who then went on to work in the Obama White House for some reason, that she cast Kal Penn in The Namesake in his starring role, and what was a beautiful performance, because young Zoran made her watch Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, the stoner movie in which he had starred. So apparently his credential for being mayor of New York is his casting genius.
By the way,
spotting Kal Penn.
But, New York has already had a mayor who was a crackpot socialist.
Yeah, facts.
In de Blasio.
Yeah. How did that work out for us?
Yeah, but the thing is, Mamdani is so much worse, because he's not just a crackpot socialist.
Yeah, he's not just
right.
He is an active, open anti-Semite,
right.
and a supporter of terrorism, a supporter of terrorist groups. I'm sure, like these weird people tweeting over the last couple of days, wants Iran to hit American bases to give us a taste of our own medicine, like that professor at Georgetown, Jonathan Brown,
I love that guy.
literally
His
professor of
father-in-law is
political
Sami
science at
El-Arian,
Georgetown,
by the
who
way.
literally,
A great job. By the
yes,
way,
deported
bravo,
from the
Georgetown.
United States.
Way to pick them. You know, it's like everybody we're finding from Georgetown, all these elite universities. That's another moment. It's another podcast. It's like we're all learning the elite.
Yeah.
The woman who just left Yale.
The emperor, especially for Jews, we love higher education, and it's such a mitzvah to get into like these selective colleges. I got to tell you, the emperor has no clothes. They stink. All right, rant over.
That's true. Okay. Well, that was a good rant. Everyone subscribe to Eli Lake's Breaking History podcast. Has an excellent one up right now about the 100th anniversary of the birth of William F. Buckley Jr. and the role that he played in fostering the conservative movement, and where he was good and where he was less good. Every time's a treasure trove. You do Lenny Bruce. You do JFK.
At some point, John, I gotta do Norman.
You do this
at some point. It has to be done. Anyway.
Okay. Well,
he's another giant.
Okay. There you have to do that. Okay. Thank you. All right. So, thank you for being on as ever, and for Seth and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.